Howdy brewers, this is a jar of harvested US-05 yeast. So in this video I'm just going to run you through how I go about storing, harvesting, washing, everything I do in terms of my yeast collections, because I've had yeast store for at least up to 9 months and not use them, and a 1 litre starter gets that yeast activated again, and so it's still good to use even after 9 months in the fridge. So I just store this jar in with my other beers and kegs. So I'll run through my processes so you too can harvest and keep your own yeasts. Howdy brewers. In this video I'm going to run you through the few things I do, try and make it as logical as I can for how I go about harvesting my yeast, caring for my yeast, and making a yeast starter. So and I think I've been doing it for a number of years now, where sometimes I don't brew with a particular style of yeast for months after I've harvested it, and despite the home-brew law, LORE law, that it won't last more than a couple of weeks or a month in the fridge, I with that Australian sparkling ale that I made, that took it had been, so I used the Cooper's harvested yeast. That the last time I used that was, I think it was September 2019, so 8 months ago. I just did a simple 1 litre starter. It fermented in about 24 hours, and then I pitched it into my, it smelt fine, tasted fine, and so I pitched it into the sparkling ale for that beer, and it has had no issues fermenting. So you might be able to hear the bubbles as we do this part of the video. So getting the yeast starter from the yeast that's been stored in the fridge, so you can see from that it's clear. It's very clear. It's been months sitting in the fridge like this. We won't use this straight away because we have to cool it down. Things you're going to need for restarting your dormant yeast is some sanitizer in some sort of bottle or jar to do your yeast starter. And just sanitize as you normally would. Some alfoil, sanitized. These are some scales. Now, first thing, doesn't matter what size starter you want to use. I recommend testing whether it's viable or not. So I do that with 1 litre of starter. So I use 100 grams of dry malt extract, and then I weigh 1 kilogram of water. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly 100 grams and exactly 1 litre of water, but that's roughly what you're going for, the 10-to-1 ratio. It won't take long to dissolve, but then I dissolve it. And just rinse. Some of the dry malt got stuck around the neck, so washing it all down. Alright. Now, I'm not in any rush to get this starter going, so I'm just going to cool this down in my keezer, and I'll put the yeast back in there as well. And then when it's cooled down to pitching temp, which is let's say 20 degrees roughly, when it's cooled down to about that, that's when I'll pitch this and put it on the stir plate. Stir plate is not essential. Okay, we'll come back later. Our wort sample is cool, and so because I have a stir plate, put my little magnetic stirrer just in there. Let that sanitize. And normally I would do this over the sink, but because we don't need all the water, or it's actually a little bit of beer as well, because we don't need all that to pour into the starter, just decant most of it off. You only need to leave enough in the bottom to get it all off the bottom. Now, because this has been in the fridge for, gonna say at least 6 to 8 months. But this is my S189 yeast, so I'm not sure the last beer I made. It'll be on the channel sometime last year. So Swiss lager yeast. Okay. That's all of it off the bottom. Put our stir plate in. Try not to just drop it in case, because it's magnet, it's metal, it's heavy, can crack the bottom, or it might. It's literally so if I didn't have a stir plate, I would just leave it like this, and as often as I could, I'd come down, slosh it around, get some air into it. Point is, this is happy to be fermented with oxygen, because you want to get as much active yeast again as possible, and oxygen allows for that to happen. It's on my stir plate. Alright, and that I'll check on that. So their starting gravity was 1040, and I'll check on that. You should be able to see a krausen come up anyway. It'll be thin, but you should be able to see it in, say, 24 to 48 hours. This is a bit of a slow starter, so I might leave this one go 3 days. Alright, and that's how you can reactivate an old yeast that you've kept under the right conditions. This has been on the stir plate for about 48 hours. I hope you can see it, I hope it comes through, but there's a small krausen line there indicating we have had fermentation. So I won't leave it to 72 hours because that's the krausen line's there. So I'm going to take this off and I'll put it in the fridge just so the wort clears, or the beer fermented malt clears, and then we'll get a gravity reading, have a smell and whatnot, and a little taste just to check to make sure that we had a full fermentation. This is our yeast starter that we put in the fridge earlier today. Just going to check how well it fermented. Smells okay. Now remember, a yeast starter won't taste like normal beer. There's no bitterness in it. So as long as it tastes clean, you have nothing to worry about. So it started at 1040, and this is now, the bricks reading is 3.4. Started at 1040, so that means it finished at about 1007. So despite being in the fridge for about 9 months, this yeast has been brought back to life. So I'll put that back in the fridge to clarify even further before I put it back in the jar, ready for use whenever I want to use it. Alright, so that's doing a collection, then storage. So collection, and then get it ready for storage, and then storing it. As long as you wash it and clean it as best you can a few times, it lasts quite a lot longer than what we're told in all the homebrew forums and whatnot. So this is 9 months old, and I've used a few yeasts that are more than 9 months old. That Australian sparkling ale yeast I used, it's at least 7 or 8 months old, and clean starter, and use that for a beer, and that beer was fermented in less than 4 days. So and that's following this method here of the waking up the yeast. And alright, so that's the full cycle of how I care for my yeast. Alright, so happy brewing, everyone. Here's how I go about collecting my yeast. So all the yeast, or most of the yeast, has dropped out of solution, and it sits there at the bottom of the fermenter. Once I fill the keg, I'll show you how I go about collecting it and then washing it. Once the fermenter is empty, you will want to probably add a little bit more water just to shake up some of the sediment, make it easier, especially if you cold crash. Normal tap water is fine for this. I should add, normal tap water is fine, provided this is the same water you brew with. Any tap water that's high in chlorines and chloramines, you're likely to get that betadine flavour if you use that yeast. So just be careful of your chloramine count. So once you've got all the yeast stirred up off the bottom, I use a sanitised 3 litre juice bottle and a wide mouth funnel. Once you've emptied the fermenter, or the yeast from the fermenter, into your bottle, I just leave this for about 30 minutes, and you'll start to see all the separation. The trube will be down the bottom, being the fats and oils and proteins. There'll be some clearing beer at the top, and in the middle is where the yeast, that's what we want to collect. So we'll come back in about 30 minutes, and just outside in a sealed container. I hope you can see the clear beer at the top, and there's a line there, and that's all the trube stuff we don't want. This is the stuff we want. This is the yeast, and so we'll just decant most of this. And so this is a 3 litre bottle, this is a 2 litre jar, and I'll just decant it into there. So I've left the bottom, you can still see where the trube is, and because that's pretty clean, I would put this in the fridge, or you could put this in the fridge if you wanted to. I will, and then the yeast will settle out and compact even further. Or if it's dirty, more dirty, or there's more trube, you do that again into another sanitized jar or vessel. So you can do this any number of times, but I'll show you how it looks after a night in the fridge. You can see after just a couple of days in your fridge or kegerator, keezer, whatever, you can see the yeast has settled right out. So to save a bit of space, I decant this so I can fill it. I can fill a mason jar, and then I transfer the yeast into that, and also you rinse it one last time. So I'll just decant it first. So I've decanted most of it, and you'll see that there's still a tiny bit of slurry on the bottom, but that's okay. Because I'll show you how we do one last rinse. Just make sure, put the lid on while we add our water to our slurry. You only need enough water just to dissolve the rest of the slurry. Not dissolve, sorry, just suspend the rest of the slurry. And I like to just add water to the top of the rim. Tight. And now that is ready for the fridge. Just place it inside, and then you've got your yeast, pure strain, ready to go for the next batch that you want to use that particular strain of yeast for. And that is how I do my yeast care, maintenance, harvesting, everything to do with yeast. Happy brewing.